My next guest is Nancy Owens. She's with Housing Vermont, and Housing Vermont made that's an affordable housing group here in the state, and they made an important announcement last week about maybe, for lack of a better phrase, going regional. Nancy Owens is going to explain to us what's going on. Good morning, Nancy. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to check in with you because I know affordable housing is a huge issue in Vermont. I want to talk about that in general with you, but I also want to talk about your own organization and the big change that was announced last week. Tell us what that announcement was all about.
Sure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that. Housing Vermont has joined together with another organization that's based out of Portland, Maine, called Northern New England Housing Investment Fund. It's also a nonprofit organization that works in housing. And the two of us have created a new organization, a parent organization, which will link us together and hold us together. And that new organization is called Evernorth. And Evernorth joins us together and will join our, as you mentioned, our regions. So that includes Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and actually Housing Vermont has for the last 5 years also worked in western Massachusetts and a little bit in New York State. Or we can work in New York State, though we haven't done any work there yet.
I see. Okay. Huh. That's interesting. I sort of always assumed, or I guess I just didn't know, that a nonprofit housing organization would be kind of state-based and living by legislative funding from a specific state, and that it would be living by probably rules in terms of client eligibility and all that sort of stuff, also coming down from specific states, and so that the landscape for affordable housing might look significantly different in New York versus Vermont, or New Hampshire or Maine versus Vermont. It sounds like that's not really the case, or what is the case?
Yeah, I think there are certainly resources, money, programs, and things that are absolutely state-based, and we will use within particular states. Whether folks here, I'm sure, are familiar with our Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, which is funded through the state legislature, and any money that is provided by VHCB stays in Vermont. And so if we were to work with VHCB on a project, we would never take state money and go spend it in New Hampshire. So we will, and just like VHCB, there are organizations in Maine and New Hampshire just like that. So state or federal resources designated for that state area will stay in that area. But nonprofits, think about Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, right? They merged together some time ago. Or on a federal level, I think about the Northern Borders Regional Commission, which is interested in how the economies across Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and upstate New York, work together, and how they have so many similarities and issues that. So there are examples of other regional organizations in other sectors that have come together over the years.
What are some of the similarities and issues or challenges which face folks concerned with affordable housing in say Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and I mean the four states? Let's take them all as a unit and say what are the commonalities, and then we'll get to differences in a moment.
Yeah. So some of the commonalities around housing are, some of it is our housing stock, right, is old. Older than most of the other stock in the nation, which makes sense from when we were settled and how long we've been settled. Think about also we have in common a very aging population across the three states. We have many small rural communities that are that's a commonality, especially across northern New Hampshire. Certainly, as you look in southern Maine and southern New Hampshire, they're much closer to the metro areas of eastern Massachusetts, Boston, and some of the bigger cities. Yeah, and we have in common, unfortunately, high rents. There's a lot of people who are what we call housing cost burdened, people who are paying, so much out of their income for rent, that it leaves not really enough, or it makes it very challenging for the other costs that they have.
Yeah, I know that's a very common lament here, and as well as other parts of the country, which we can talk about in a moment as well. But I guess I wanted to ask about kind of is that the real problem? I mean, are landlords just pocketing a lot of cash, or is it tied to renovation and construction costs when somebody decides they're going to take an old building and rehab it and turn it into apartments? I've seen that happen in a couple of cases, and then I hear that each of the units would be valued at like $300 and something thousand, and I'm thinking, wow, that's a lot of money, and it's something that you could kind of compare the mortgage that would have to be paid on that to average folks' incomes, and stuff breaks down, doesn't it?
It does break down, right? There's a real discord between wages and housing costs. There's a discord between value and housing costs. Construction costs are very high across the 3 states. Land costs can be high. There's sometimes challenges with where we can build, because multifamily housing isn't always zoned in to communities, and that's something actually Vermont has been working on quite a bit this year. The Agency of Commerce and Community Development, they're working on some new programs and regulations to have towns create more places within their communities that multifamily housing can be built. Housing. It's very complex, and I would just say it's not our problem alone. If you notice and watch the news, and besides all the current news going on, but housing is a national issue around. Many states face this problem. One of our problems is, as I said, is we have an aging housing stock. So we have housing stock that's not in great shape. We have a challenge building new homes because maybe we don't have the water and sewer capacity, the right, locations that make sense for multifamily because of zoning. We have high construction costs, and we also are losing housing stock. Sometimes we're losing it to the market, like you said, where housing maybe had some federal subsidies, and now those subsidies have expired, and they're being converted to from affordable to market rate. We also lose housing stock to the short-term rental market, and most recently, which is a little distressing to me, is we're losing some home ownership stock to people who are looking for refuge from the current pandemic. There's been several news articles across the 3 states about how quickly homes are selling and for what they're selling for, and they're being purchased as a place of refuge for folks who are in areas that, more urban areas or places where they want to escape to northern Maine or New Hampshire or Vermont from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're in New York and you're really worried about this horrible pandemic sweeping through the whole New York metro area, and you think to yourself, one of these mornings I may just have to get up and flee, and you have the disposable income to do it. You might go and start shopping for houses in Lyndonville, Vermont, or something. And compared to the New York metro area, the housing prices in Lyndonville are going to look pretty cheap, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
so it's been reported from a number of different places that there is some of that happening, and it's it may not be large in numbers, but the impact is such that because we have a shortage of housing, really. I feel like any home that we lose that can't be, that isn't for someone who's, I don't begrudge anyone moving up here to Vermont, and of course we talk a lot about trying to grow our population. So anybody who wants to come and live here and work here and, be part of the community and volunteer at the library and, have the kid in school, terrific.
Yeah.
But to lose housing stock for folks who are living here and working here, or who have to compete against that kind of pricing, even losing one home for me at this point, there's just so many people who are struggling to afford housing, whether it's a single family home or an apartment. Really, it's folks at almost every income that are challenged.
Yeah. I mean, two big things come up in my mind when I think of housing affordability, and one is, in our own case, my wife and I bought the house we live in 1992, and I can think back over the years about our monthly mortgage payment and our monthly, we set aside some for property taxes every month. We've put a certain amount of money into various projects to improve the place, and so on and so forth over time. And if I look back over that nearly 30-year period, I think we'll have it paid off about 2 years from this month. In fact, we the biggest expense, the biggest outflow of money from our checking account has been for the interest on the mortgage. Bigger than property taxes, bigger than housing prices. The actual sort of price tag of the house, etc., or the principal. And is that anything that your group ever looks at and sort of thinks about? Is there a way to tackle that as a part of the expense picture here? I mean, people debate property taxes ad nauseum at the State House, but I never hear anybody debating, interest rates, or I know they're set nationally, but I mean, it just seems like it's kind of this weird thing that we never pay any attention to that.
Well, the agency that really works on homeownership and helps folks to get into homeownership and offers, below market mortgages and also down payment assistance is the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, and that's the same in New Hampshire and Maine. Those housing finance agencies are also located there, and actually currently right now interest rates are as low as they can go, honestly.
Yeah.
Fed has set the base rate at 0, and so those dollars are going further. You can borrow more, but that agency, Evernorth, our new organization, is really focused primarily on rental housing, and that's our area of expertise, and that's where our focus has been for the last 30 years.
Yep. And what is happening with rents? If you want to right now go out and rent a 2-bedroom apartment in pick a town, Waterbury, Vermont, where WDEV is located, how much have those rents changed over the past 10 years?
Yeah, rents have gone up quite a bit, especially, I would say, in the last previous maybe 4 or 5 years. They escalated very quickly. Yeah.
Is that just a question of what the market will bear, or are there sort of underlying costs that landlords are facing that they're trying to recoup, or what's going on? Why is that the case?
I think it is somewhat what the market will bear. There's also been, I think there are more people renting. That's been a change as well. That as homeownership has been harder for people to get into, there's been more households. So younger households are not buying homes at the same time in their life that we were, you and I, were in our generation when, you might be buying. I bought my home when I was, my late 20s.
Yeah.
The young people at that age, now they have tremendous education debt, and they're not in a place where they have the resources, to save up and buy a home. They also, I think, there's not as much stability. People are moved from job to job and place to place, so they're deferring and waiting to buy those homes. So they're renting more. So that's the other thing, is there are just more households.
Well, and again, I think maybe the biggest factor is just the price tags, because again, to refer to our own case, when we bought our house in 1992. It's a cape with 4 bedrooms, and it needed some work when we bought it. It wasn't in perfect shape or anything, but we paid just a hair over $100,000 for it. And to get a 4-bedroom cape these days in pretty much anywhere in Vermont, you're looking at least 3, maybe closer to $400,000, right?
That's true. Yes. Yep.
I mean that's scary inflation right there. That's a quadrupling in price over time. And are there any techniques or methods you can use, your group can employ to try to put the brakes on that to some extent?
Well, one of the things Vermont is very renowned for, and again, I'm speaking on behalf of the whole housing network, and as we talk about home ownership, because it's not my area of expertise, but we have a program that that the Champlain Housing Trust, based in Burlington, was one of the earliest providers in the nation of land trusts, where we are creating home ownership with people who don't have down payments and who share the equity accrued in their home over time in exchange for assistance, pretty large amount of assistance to get into home ownership. So they will provide, substantial grants, $30,000, $40,000, $60,000 to help people get into a home. And then what happens is when those homes are in the shared equity portfolio and they're resold, there's an obligation to resell them to another person who meets those income qualifications. So it's a way to make homeownership accessible to folks who might not otherwise be able to do that. So it's a great program, and it's a national and international model, and Vermont is really a pioneer in that.
Nancy Owens, you mentioned earlier on of the rental market being the main focus of your organization of trying to get people into decent housing, and what are your main tools there? What do you use to make that happen?
Right. So we both organizations that merged to become Evernorth were created to use a federal tool called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And the federal government provides to every single state a tax credit, which can be sold on benefit a corporation, who then we use the capital that they use to purchase those tax credits to build affordable housing. And so one of the things that we do is that work, and it's called syndication. And we, as Evernorth, we raise capital from banks and primarily from banks and other investors into a fund, and then we're able to deploy that capital to developers around the region who are building affordable rental housing. So we work with public housing authorities, nonprofit developers, private sector developers, and provide them that equity to build affordable rental housing.
Those developers, the nonprofits and other organizations that are out there, government organizations and so on, building affordable rental housing, how successful are they these days, or do they have things that are not in their toolkit which they should have in their toolkit?
Yeah, I think, there's a variety of capacity, organization to organization, and that's really one of the reasons that we were created originally, and one of the reasons we continue to work is that in addition to providing the capital, we also provide development and consulting expertise to work with organizations that may not have they may not develop property on a regular basis, but do it periodically, and may not have all of those tools and skills in house. So both organizations, but the pre-existing organizations have a really strong track record of working in the rural parts of their state. So more than 60% of the capital and the work and the projects that Housing Vermont has built over the last 30 years has been in the rural parts of our state, and in Maine and New Hampshire, that's about 45% of the resources have gone to the rural areas. And frankly, that probably wouldn't have happened without us. It is, if it were just market-driven activity, I think, a lot of it would occur where there's the biggest demand, where rents are the highest, where, it's easier to build housing in the more settled areas of the states. So that's been one of our
and of course,
missions, is to make sure we reach the whole state and that affordable housing is accessible in communities, in all the communities that we work in.
And of course, there's been a big push in recent years in Vermont to try to focus housing development in the existing pre-built, already built, village centers, town centers, et cetera, and to discourage sprawl. Are you finding that there's enough opportunity in our village centers and town centers to build enough affordable housing, or would you like to be able to spread out a little bit?
Well, we are so supportive of the anti-sprawl work and the village center work. That is a policy that Vermont adopted, 35 years ago, and has been consistently and persistently applying. And I think our state is better for it, and environmentally and in so many ways. It's better. And so we're committed to working in the small towns and village centers. As I mentioned earlier, the state agency is working with the communities to talk about and think about how they've zoned those towns and village centers and how they could make them more.
I hate to interrupt Nancy Owens, but we're about out of time. I really appreciate you taking some time with us this morning. Nancy Owens of Housing Vermont and Evernorth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave.